This video is probably overdue, because it's been a while since I decided I was not a libertarian anymore. Maybe I delayed in saying anything about it because I'm still libertarian-ish. I love the spirit of libertarianism. I like the the instinct that brings people towards libertarianism. I still like Thomas Sowell. I still like many of the libertarian thinkers. I have a bit of a soft spot for Stefan Molyneux still, but it's uh, some years ago I finally realized that libertarian is not it's not just wrong, it is essentially wrong. It can't be correct. Um, and I was reminded of this by listening to a gentleman I've kind of discovered recently. A friend recommended him to me like a year ago or so once he got out of bodybuilding and strength training and started talking philosophy and politics. And that's Mike Israetel. Mike Israetel has been talking about policy and culture and current events and stuff. And I was sort of listening to some of his videos. He put out a video on like what Republicans get right and what Democrats get right. And wouldn't you know it, the sort of person that puts out both of those videos is probably a libertarian, which he appears to be. And to sort of hit the hammer in the nail on that, he put out a video on why porn is not really that bad. And it's specifically the videos that are about what Democrats get right and about porn not being bad that inspired me to finally address the problem with libertarianism and what libertarianism, the fundamental thing that it gets wrong and that it misses. It You can almost speak of libertarianism definitionally in this way. You can actually define libertarianism as the political ideology that does not believe in commons. I'm going to wait for the libertarians to tear their hair out and be like, no, we can have voluntary commons, blah, blah, blah. They can't. Yes, theoretically you can, but if you have no mechanism for protecting the commons, then you don't have them. And what you're protecting the commons from is money, is corporate pressure. We saw recently, this move where Senator or Representative Mike Lee tried to put forward this bill that would sell off like millions of acres of public land that people use for hiking and hunting and camping and just outdoor recreation and enjoyment and just protecting nature from development, from civilization, really. And it was one of these extraordinary things that both the right and the left really came together on. They're like, no, we are not selling our public lands off to the highest bidder. That is absolutely not happening. And I mean, I haven't been in libertarian circles for a while, but I didn't notice them saying anything. I didn't. They seemed rather quiet, because the libertarian ideology is like, well, the government shouldn't be owning this land. It should be going to private companies that can, and a private company could make a park out of it if there's a demand for it. The problem is, of course, the demand for there to be something like a Yellowstone will never be as lucrative to a private corporation as the needs of another industrial park or something. There's no protective mechanism from it. Now, but thinking of commons literally in terms of land or like a fish, as the common like tragedy of the commons argument goes, requires we need a broader concept of a commons, because we think of commons just in terms of land, and there's a lot more to commons than just physical objects or physical places. And I was sort of educated into this position by two people in particular. One, Matthew Crawford, who I cannot recommend highly enough. If you have not read The World Beyond Your Head, it is extremely, extremely valuable, and talks about the appropriation, seizure, and commodification of our attention, and the danger that poses to our identity and our control of self, which is really just where we direct our attention. But if our attention can be seized at will, essentially, by infinitely scalable mechanisms, you might be familiar with those, then it creates some real problems for the possibilities of connection with other people. Because it turns out that in order to make connections with other people, we have to protect our ability to take other people's attention when we are in a public place. We have to be able to call them on the phone or wave to them or say hi. But if our attention is being mined, essentially, at an industrial scale, then what do people do? They retreat back into themselves. They shut down all outside intrusions. And suddenly we become isolated out of self-defense. So it's kind of a tragic cycle that is extremely well illustrated. And his answer is, what if we had a concept of an attentional commons, where humans have the right to take up each other's attention in these places, but not robots, and not, corporate ads of certain kinds. And one of the things he pointed out is the way that when you're at a gas station and you're pumping gas, you'll have an ad played to you while you're held hostage there. And the backs of receipts will have ads on them. And just every space that our attention might possibly land on will be covered with advertisements trying to seize and monetize our attention. It becomes a rather dystopian world, and the further implications of that get worse and worse the more you think about it. Anyways, Matthew Crawford is one. The other is Kurt Doolittle. Kurt Doolittle, who I have interviewed on this channel on the Caffeine Stream. Brilliant guy. Highly recommend you check that out, and his other work, which he has expanded. He's now the Natural Law Institute, but his thinking began with proprietarianism as the label, and I love that term. Actually, he doesn't like it anymore, but it begins with the question of what is property. And the classic liberal answer was something like, oh, it's when you mix your labor with the land in a particular way, and there's certain parameters and stuff. And it's this really kind of strange definition where there's some cases where it doesn't work. You imagine if you dump a can of tomato soup into the ocean, you don't own the ocean, you just lost a can of tomato soup, But the definition of property he arrived at, which I've come to like a lot, is it's what people are willing to fight over. My wife is fond of saying, in kind of a joking way half the time, that possession is 9/10 of the law. And it's kind of a jokish saying in law, in the legal world, but it's kind of true, too. If you have something, it's a lot harder legally for people to take it away from you than it is for you to fight to have it. So what people are willing to fight over, and I don't mean just physically fight, but also legally, culturally, and all these other things, is property. And the beauty of this definition, it is so functional. It applies to so many things, and it expands what can be considered not just property, but also collective property. And in both cases, we see a way, Crawford's case and in Doolittle's case, we see a concept of property, which matters a lot to libertarians, that can be abstract and collective. And there are a lot of examples we can bring up. We can talk about social trust. We could talk about public beauty, which sort of segues into HOAs and other things that libertarians hate. We can talk about language, the preservation of the meaning of words, the policing of language. Gets kind of tricky there. We can talk about religious cohesion. One of the ones that is near and dear to my heart is and I'm sure this will instantly rile up a few people on my to my side in this case, is the protection of the integrity of stories. Think about the story of the Lord of the Rings as a commons and what Amazon tried to do to it. Unsuccessfully, thankfully. But what they have done, various movie producers have done in violating the commons of certain sacred stories. This is why I take the time to go after people like Emily Wilson, for example, or who's the author of the Song of Achilles. These various, I hate to sound sexist, but it's because it's not just women. There are men who do this too, and there are great women like Caroline Alexander who does a fantastic translation of the Iliad. But it is a lot of female academics who are trying to ruin stories and twist them into weird modern political things. That it's a violation of a commons, and I want to fight about it. You know, that is something that we possess collectively. It's not just mine. I don't own the Iliad or the Odyssey, but it's something. It's something that we possess collectively, and we want to protect collectively for ourselves. And so, and I think the broadest phrase I could give to a commons that libertarianism almost can't account for is the feeling of being at home in a place. They have no concept of that because everything is fungible, everything is up for sale, everything is tradable. You have to really understand the foundations of libertarianism to get this. If you are not familiar with Ludwig von Mises and human action, you probably won't be. Fortunately, if I'm speaking to any libertarians here, libertarians as a group are very well educated. They know their own political theory better than conservatives know their political theory. Far better than progressives know their... Progressives don't know crap. As a group. Hashtag not all. But most libertarians will be familiar with Ludwig von Mises. They'll certainly be familiar with Murray Rothbard and some of the other guys too. Ayn Rand, Stefan Molyneux, maybe in a few cases. But Ludwig von Mises' his grand work, his magnum opus, was a book called Human Action. And Human Action advanced a study or field or a theory, whatever you want to call it, that he calls praxeology. And the root of praxeology, this is like the building, the foundation of all libertarianism, really, is the idea that all voluntary exchanges are good by definition for the people involved. Because the act of trading is the expression of the preferences of the individual. Definitionally. That's the grounding tautology. In philosophy, many great theories, and by great I mean important, not necessarily correct or good, but many great theories are built on like foundational tautologies or identities. And the idea of exchange as an expression of a preference, which is good by definition to the individual, does a tremendous amount of work. And it lays the groundwork for all of what we call libertarianism today. The moment I stopped being a libertarian was the moment I got about halfway through this book I mentioned before. And the thing that breaks it is addiction. Now, I don't... If people think addiction is some, like kind of edge case. Well, some people struggle with this, but not the majority, and that's really a personal problem. They don't understand addiction. And I'm speaking as someone who has never seriously struggled with a bad addiction. Okay, I've never been like stuck on heroin or Alcoholics Anonymous or anything like that. But we all, I think, suffer addiction by degrees. And it's really the root problem of what it means to be free as an individual. And this goes all the way back to Plato's Republic, as everything does. What Plato's Socrates in the Republic criticizes in the enslavement of the tyrant is the enslavement to this addiction to the libido dominandi, the will to power, the lust for power and for domination that draws people into politics and into public life, longing for fame and power, which is very much like a sexual drive. Now, what Matthew Crawford points out, and his focus in his book is on gambling specifically, but you could make this about all kinds of things. But with gambling, the owners of the casinos will make selectively libertarian arguments about how, some people have gambling addictions, and that's a personal problem. They need help. That's a really serious problem. They need to get help and stuff. But that's not a problem for most people. Mike Israetel's a very scientific guy. He's very interested in the data on this. If you look at what the people designing smartphones and apps and all this stuff have been doing in the last 5 to 10 years, everybody can be addicted and everybody will be addicted in the right circumstances. I know people like to point to these famous Calhoun mouse studies, just with enough social connection, you won't become addicted to drugs. That's nonsense. Okay. Social connection will certainly help you avoid certain kinds of addictive behaviors, because you won't be nursing social wounds and anesthetizing yourself to certain feelings with drugs. But everybody can be addicted. Not everybody has the same addictive proclivities, but everybody can be addictive. And I think in our day and age, almost everybody is at least mildly, if not massively, addicted to these. I don't exclude myself, by the way. It's sometimes a problem. Some people have developed good strategies for dealing with their phone addictions. If you do, please let me know. I'm always open to more ideas for how to deal with that. But, addiction is really a stand-in for all kinds of instances where people will make decisions that in the short run we can define as an expression of their preferences in the moment, but which clearly hurt them in the long run and which they clearly regret. If someone jumps off a bridge in an attempt to commit suicide, praxeology says that's a voluntary exchange. That's good. When they hit the water and survive and say, man, the moment I jumped, I regretted my choice, which is the case with many people, what does the praxeologist say then? What does the praxeologist say to, underage people getting gender reassignment surgery? Oh, they can't consent. Can't they? What does consent have to do with this? It's, if they were older and they still got manipulated into doing this thing, is that not consent? If you call manipulation coercion, well, the line of what's manipulation gets really blurry too. So there are all kinds of cases where people choose behaviors or are coaxed into, consent is manufactured to choose things that they don't prefer in the long run. one of the where this ties into some of Mike Israetel's points is in his video on pornography. He says, well, there are some people who have addiction to porn, and it's a serious problem. But he says, and he said this in like 4 or 5 different places. If watching too much porn is hurting your relationship, or hurting your chance of getting a relationship, you need to stop watching as much porn. You need to dial it back. You're in charge. Well, I don't know if you've talked to a lot of men who watch porn, Dr. Mike, but that's kind of the problem. They are having a hard time dialing it back, which is why they are talking about things as extreme as banning porn, which, by the way, I'm not in favor of. I don't think banning porn is necessarily a good thing. And as he points out, he makes a very cute but accurate metaphor. It's like, maybe we don't want to, swing our hammer at a nail that's surrounded by computer chips that we might damage if we miss. It's a very correct metaphor. If you set up the governmental power to do something like banning porn, there is a danger of precedence there that we should be worried about. But we still need to address the problem that this is not just an individual issue. This is not just, oh, well, some people have a problem controlling themselves, and that's really a personal problem. No, this is an everybody problem. It's a human problem. The things that make phones and video games and pornography and certain kinds of drugs addictive is that they hack certain natural parts of the human psychology. They are designed to be addictive. And one of the things that Tristan Harris, an ethicist in Silicon Valley, notes is that what's so fascinating is that the people who design these apps to be addicting, they put in the mechanisms to maximize screen time, basically. You'd think that if you understood the mechanisms, you'd be immune to it. But because they're designed to work on people, and understanding the mechanism doesn't make you any less of a person, they still work on the people who design them to be addictive, which is kind of amusing and a little bit unnerving as well. So framing it as an individual problem, as Mike Israetel does, actually violates what we know scientifically about human nature. I know one of his big things is being like scientific. What's the data? What's the thing? And he has such a good instinct for asking the right kinds of questions. The correlation causation questions he's asking in pornography are exactly the kinds of questions that people should be asking about things in general. Whenever this causes that. Well, is that caused? Or is it just correlated, and is the causation by some third entity? Or is it reversed? Does B cause A? As was the case in some of the things he brought up in his porn video. Does watching more porn cause men to be lonely? No. And we don't need to do studies on this. Obviously, it's the other way around. But he dodged the issue on one question. At one point he asked, does watching porn cause male body dysmorphia or dysphoria? I get the two mixed up. Obviously, yes. That is not just a correlation. That is a causation. And he totally focused like some evasive MSNBC pundit on the bodies of male porn stars are nothing to be impressed by. Look at Ron Jeremy, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Mike, no one is looking at their six-pack. No one is looking at their pecs. No one is looking at their biceps. That's not what people are talking about. That's not the dysmorphia any man is concerned about. That's why the number one snake oil pill that you can find at any virus-infested website on the internet is not to make your calves bigger. Although I'm sure a lot of guys would buy that too. And as soon as you focus on the right object of dysmorphia, you understand why paying all that attention, which creates a sense of importance, to pornography obviously creates dysmorphia. It's causal. We don't need a study. It would be interesting to do a study. I don't know how you navigate the scientific ethics waters of that. But yeah, no, there are some things that are the causation is reversed. There are some things that's just correlation. But yeah, some things are causal. So, this I think takes it back to the fundamental problem of libertarianism. There's two ways you can kind of understand that you can attempt to advance libertarianism. You can, first of all, you can say, oh, it's all about science, it's all about data. And this is what we see with like people like Milton Friedman or Thomas Sowell with all their historical anecdotes and examples. By the way, Thomas Sowell should be like mandatory reading. He's excellent. Not correct about everything, but so solid in his argumentation. People should at least be familiar with his works, and he is right about most things. But when you begin with science and data, and if you say, oh, we should be libertarian because of science and data, you will find there are a lot of oughts. Oh, people ought to be this way. People ought to be that way. This is obviously people, a good person will do X. And where is the data behind the oughts? This is the Humean is ought distinction here that we run into when we try to build a worldview on data. Why should individuals be free to choose? What happens when they're free to choose? Does the data suggest that they do better when they choose for themselves? Oh, look, we've got a whole field that studies this called behavioral economics, and they're saying that they don't. They're saying they are predictably irrational, which is true, by the way. And we end up the foundation in data and science does not lead us to libertarianism. It leads us to a kind of soft authoritarianism, a hidden, gloved hand by Cass Sunstein's nudge. We're gonna shift the defaults so that everyone has to opt out of a 401k instead of opting in. We'll do all these little. We'll twist the dials and shift the levers to carefully, kind of subtly nudge people into the way that we want them to be. And what I think is terrible about that is not the understanding of human nature, because they're correct. What's terrible about the Cass Sunstein nudge mode of governance is the opacity. It's the pretense of choice and freedom. Oh no, you're still in charge. We're just shifting your options slightly, but it's still totally up to you. It's like these people who say, oh, the COVID vaccines were never mandated. Yeah, but they were coerced pretty freaking hard. Don't come back now and say, oh, we never made you take it. Yes, you freaking did. Shut up. And the opacity of it, the hiddenness of the control over other people's actions leads to corruption, because when it's not known who is controlling you or why, or that control is not obvious, there is less accountability, and that's where the problem arises. Now, you don't have to defend libertarianism based on science and data. You can say, no, libertarianism is just a better way to live. You can have an almost a mythological, almost a spiritual defense of libertarianism, which is, by the way, kind of my feeling about it. It's like, no, this is the way I want to live. I don't care necessarily about what data says we should be doing or whatever. No, leave me alone. But for that to work, you have to live in a society which collectively holds libertarian values. That's a commons. And, people who don't hold the view can take advantage and freeload off the system. And by the way, they will beat libertarians every time because they are, by the structure of their belief system, better at organizing than libertarians, you know. And you'll hear people like Stefan Molyneux say, well, people can choose this society. They can choose, and they can be persuaded to adopt this libertarian view of the world. No, they can't. And they won't. People are not that rational. And frankly, in many cases, they shouldn't be that rational. Because rationality, there are epistemological problems with being excessively rational. You can only be rational about things where you have the data and the necessary information. We have to make decisions with imperfect data all the time. Not only are we predictably irrational, thank you, Dan Ariely, for that, we must be irrational. And frankly, I don't want Dan Ariely in charge of my decisions because he thinks he's more rational than me or something. No, he's not. And when you have a society where you have this, where you create this freedom, where you act like everybody's responsible for their own behavior, absolutely. And if they get addicted, well, that's just their own choice. Then you necessarily allow for people who take advantage of that. Some of the best gifts given to us by the proprietarians, like Kurt Doolittle, are phrases like bait into hazard. I don't know if they came up with that, but that's how I became familiar with it. Or vice traps. I think that's an older phrase. People who make their living off of drawing people into vice or convincing them to make bad decisions. And by the way, not all of this is done with any kind of lie. You can hear people say things like, oh, you could save up to 15% or more on your car insurance by switching to a lizard. And if you plot that on like a box and whisker chart, it's like you could save up to 15% or more. It tells you literally nothing, but it locks your brain onto this number. And if you hear that repeatedly, often enough, you will associate that with the company. That's how your brain works. It's not like a rationality thing. It will tie those two things together for you. And the up to or more is literally just legal protection. Like you could save up to 15% or more in Minecraft on your car insurance. That would be the Gen Z way of doing it, I guess. And the libertarian freedom must allow for that. Curtis Yarvin described the libertarianism of Ludwig von Mises as like perfect and brilliant, but only within a certain set of constraints. He said like the liberalism, which is what they used to call libertarianism, the liberalism of Ludwig von Mises is like keeping a telephone pole standing upright. It doesn't take that much force to keep the telephone pole upright if it's already vertical. But it takes a whole lot more force to get the telephone pole upright than it does to keep it upright. So the doctrines of libertarianism are great for maintaining a libertarian society, Curtis Yarvin says. But the problem with Africa is not that they just didn't institute the right, like Chicago school economic policy. Somalia's got slightly bigger problems than that. But I don't think we need to go to Africa to find the telephone pole laying on its side. And I think the idea of instituting libertarianism in this rejection of the commons, in this rejection of human nature, really, applies as much in the West and in Europe as it does to anywhere else. Because at the end of the day, the telephone pole we're trying to lift up or keep up is human nature itself. And human nature is not this Ayn Randian objectivist rational animal that is purely rational and is only rational because rationality defines the human or whatever. We have a rational agent. We have a prefrontal cortex. We have a Platonic logos, but we also have some other things, you know? We have a sex drive that causes us to become addicted to porn. We have a digestive tract that causes us to overeat sugar. Well, stop eating sugar. Yeah, some people like food more than other people, you know? We have all of these features of our neurology and of our physiology that get gamed by drugs and certain kinds of social interactions and other things. And to act like those are all individual problems, which is, it is where libertarianism takes you at the end of the day, is just, it is actually not the scientific and data-driven position that Israetel thinks it is. And it's funny because Israetel, Mike is a little bit selective about this. He takes this very libertarian position on immigration. His take is just awful, especially when you contrast his take on immigration with his take on drugs. He's like, well, if you decriminalize drugs, then you decriminalize the number of crimes you have. That's true. Might be some other issues with the drugs besides just the fact that we've made them criminal, but fair enough with things like pot or whatever. But then with immigration, he's like, the problem is the illegal immigrants. It's like, well, what if we just legalize it all? Does that solve our problem? Maybe we don't only care about GDP number go up, Mike. Maybe it isn't just about GDP, Mike. Maybe if our country makes a lot more money, but I am put out of a job, and I am cast aside as an unwanted refuse from my own home country in favor of foreigners. He's like, good, you got replaced by someone better than you. Good for who, Mike? You were talking about, I thought this was a very nice analogy, AI as sort of digital immigration as far as labor goes. Maybe so. Why not replace all humans with robots? Wouldn't that be so much better for the GDP, Mike? Brilliant. Let's replace all humans with robots. So much more efficient. No. Benefit. What does a robot care about GDP? Better for whom and why? The for whom matters a lot. For whom matters a lot. And this is the flip side of libertarianism and individualism, is there is no for whom. And it becomes this incredibly cold, impersonal, and kind of inhuman philosophy at the end of the day. But Mike's not an ideologue, I don't think, because he does see the value of commons in things like cops, which he's very, very highly supportive of, and the military. Thinks we should have a bigger, badder military. Agreed. Yes, it's great to have a fantastic military. And to the point of cops and military, does acknowledging the importance of commons and the protection of commons, like our law enforcement are commons of sorts, so are utilities in a way. Does that mean we need to become authoritarian and just delete the free market? No, of course not. We have checks and limitations on the state, and we should maintain those. By the way, those limitations, very valuable commons in our Constitution. But this idea that if it's not hurting anybody directly, then it's axiomatically morally fine. That argument needs to go away, because that doesn't hold up. That is it's not hurting anybody. Yeah, gambling by itself doesn't hurt anybody. Porn by itself doesn't hurt anybody. Propaganda by itself doesn't hurt anybody. This is like sticks and stones may break my bones arguments. By the way, the hard argument against absolute free speech is not a bad metaphor about shouting fire in a crowded theater from the from the Schenck case. It's libel. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but rape allegations will never hurt me. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think I'd rather get hit by a stick, frankly, than be accused of molesting a child or any kind of rape for that matter. Some people would literally rather be physically beaten than to even be accused of racism. I think that number is dwindling these days. I wonder why. But that used to be the case. You know, and if from a scientific perspective, from a materialist perspective, where's the harm in that? Where's the harm in libel? This is one of the challenging things about libel, is proving libel requires demonstrating harm. That can be kind of tricky to do. Back in the old days, they used to have things called fighting words, where it was enough if it threatened your honor. That's maybe a subjective standard. Maybe there are problems with that too. But maybe we lost something valuable in throwing that out at the same time. And the idea that if something's not hurting anybody directly, it's just two consensual adults doing this thing that has no effect on anybody else, despite it being done like in a commons. So, because I'm not talking about in private bedrooms or whatever, but like a pride parade, for example, or like the butchering of a classical story in some new like DEI film. Like these are intentional assaults on the commons. From a material perspective, you can't prove harm, but the feeling of harm is real. And it's something that people care about in the same way that people care about their connections with other people. Love is not real from a purely material frame. But what else is more important to fight over than that? What else is more meaningful than that? So I don't mean this as an attack on Mike Israetel or even on libertarians. Mike Israetel is a very smart guy. He has, and I'm not saying that to blow smoke, the instinct he has to ask the right questions and to say things like, okay, here's a claim. If that's true, what else must be true? Or here's a claim. What's the data and what's the historical comparison? Questions I've heard him ask recently. Very good instinct for asking good questions. He is a good model to follow for people in how to think in general. So I like him a lot. I think he's a very smart guy. But there's a limitation that his material sort of scientific approach to these things is constraining him in politics and culture. And I think libertarians in general suffer from this limitation a little bit. When you expand your concept of property and expand your concept of what people care about, I think you understand people better. Libertarianism just completely falls apart. So, anyways, I hope that was interesting and useful to you. I thought it'd be useful to do a kind of a one-off video here. But if you enjoyed this, what were you supposed to say? Like, subscribe, share, or whatever nonsense. Don't do any of that. Just enjoy the content and think for yourself. Thanks for listening.